Good morning, everybody. So we're now going to kick off with the main program of talks. The way we're going to do it is each speaker is going to be introduced by a member of the team at Autistic Minds. So it's my job to introduce the introducer. So there you go. So I just want to welcome someone to the stage who was a great inspiration for me. He's helped me improve my Welsh. And it's absolute joy every time I see him in the office. We can just chat in Welsh together, and he helps me all the way along in terms of improving my language, which I sadly let slip, but it's on the way back up. So please give a very warm welcome to a fantastic human being. It's Nath Trevett.
No offence, Alan, but I still think you're too modest. Right, so, welcome, everyone, to the Autistic Minds live show 2023. I hope you've all settled nicely and that you'll continue to enjoy your day here at the City Stadium, filled with stalls and seminars. Now, my name is Nath, as you just heard. I'm the team's translator, plus I joined the outreach team a couple of months ago, so I'm now based in the community a lot more. As well as translating office documents into Welsh, I also do talks and sometimes work concurrently with other departments who require my services. So, for instance, when the directory department have wanted online articles translating before throwing them into archive, I've assisted with that, or I've helped them to find translated articles that are already online. Now, today I'll be hosting interviews around the stalls, but I'm always happy to assist in any way I can, even for those who would like to have a conversation in Welsh. So there we are. Let's welcome our first guest speaker for today. I believe he's going to tell us a bit about his autism journey up to now. Please put your hands together for Jacob Stewart-BROWN.
Well, then, this is a bit of a change of pace from what I used to, but whatever. Hello, my name's Jacob Stewart-BROWN. I suppose you could say I'm some random autistic donning off the street, but I've been like this for a good few years, ever since I got diagnosed, and since that point, I've been on a journey that I could describe as life-changing, nothing short of it. So my presentation today is going to give you a bit of an explanation over my experiences with discovering the fact that I was autistic, but also learning to embrace it and how being diagnosed, as much as some people may be a bit fearful of it, for me, it brought me a great deal of freedom and the ways in which I learned to use that freedom. Right, let's see if this thing works. Ah, it does. That's good. So, as you can see, I've lived in 3 different countries before I came back here. I was actually born in West London, but that was boring, so it doesn't matter. Shortly after that, I moved to Australia. And needless to say, it was not easy, to say the least. My home life was quite comfortable. In fact, something that always helps is to have a good sense of routine. And that was something my parents really instilled into not just me, but also my twin brother. Not because it just helps with parenting in general, it makes things a bit easy for you, but also, especially if someone's autistic, which I was, but, well, we didn't know that, it makes it a lot easier for them to cope at home. It gives them that sense of, how do I put it? Sense of reassurance. You know what's happening. You know when it's meant to be happening. And instead of always worrying about what's going to happen and when and all the uncertainty that comes with that, you know what's happening. You know you're safe. You know everything is going to be okay. That being said, like I said, I briefly mentioned before, I do have a twin brother. But if I didn't have a twin brother, I would be having a much less enjoyable time with life. My brother was always there as a source of comfort, someone who could sort of take the lead when I couldn't. People always say that twins have like an alpha and, I suppose, One's always more dominant than the other. There's one that always takes the lead with social situations. And, I mean, that still is true today. But, especially for me, being autistic and the social difficulties that come with that, to say the least, it was all the more important that I had that support, that safety net always with me on almost every single day of my life. And that really helped me with my anxiety and how I coped with my early life. And if I didn't have that, well, I don't know how else it would have gone, but it would not be nice. So, school. Started school about 3.5 years old. Up until then, I was absolutely fine. No meltdowns, no anxiety, nothing. I was having a perfectly fine life. Then I started school, completely new environment, and that's when it all went downhill. There was, fortunately, no educational support. There wasn't much flexibility for students like me who had a whole plethora of problems that needed support, but the school just wasn't prepared to do it for some reason. For example, my school I went to in Australia had a strange rule where they insisted that everyone in the lower school ate fruit during break time, which on paper doesn't seem like a bad idea, but it's a bit of a bad idea when someone there cannot stand fruit and will have a meltdown if they even so much as try to touch it. Instead, what I would do, I would try to eat it, emphasis on try there. Instead, I would simply sniff it, lick it, immediately feel sick, and put it back on the plate. I know, disgusting. But, well, that was me for you. Obviously, that did not make me feel very good. I had meltdowns almost every day, and the school would be often moaning to my parents that I was just being a little gremlin, when no, that was just you being ignorant of something else going on. My sensory difficulties also made themselves pronounced. The classrooms were often loud, chaotic. To be honest, that's kind of to be expected from a class of young kids. But for me, that only made things all the more worse. My anxiety would get to the point that I would start frantically swallowing air, and immediately, the next time I go to the toilet, I think you might know what happens next. Whole thing turns chocolate-coloured. And not just the toilet. Maybe I shouldn't go any further with that. Anyway, extreme anxiety attacks were basically the norm for me, seeing as I had no coping mechanisms, I didn't know what was causing them. And I suppose if anyone here is autistic and you've had like a meltdown or an anxiety attack, you will know those things are not nice. One of them not, they're embarrassing, they're exhausting, and they're just, don't want to feel them. My parents had to go to an employment tribunal, seeing as one of the staff members at the school was unfortunately suffering from a mental illness, which they're not recovered from, and it was having an impact on my well-being. Unfortunately, with public schools in Australia, if you do need to get someone booked out of school, it needs to go to a tribunal. So there was all the stress with that. That being said, not all the teachers were bad. Some of them genuinely wanted to help me. They could see I was struggling. They empathised with me. They wanted to see me exceed. But the problem was they didn't know how, because they didn't know what was going on. Even though it was fairly obvious there was something going on, they just didn't know how. And I suppose when a teacher breaks down in your parents' arms saying something's wrong with them, I don't know what to do, that's a bit of a dire situation if you ask me. But nonetheless, even if it was well-intentioned, but nothing came out of it. My parents, understandably, got the memo that there was something going on. So they tapped into private healthcare, the public health system in Australia. They went everywhere looking for answers and support as for what might be going on with me and how they could help me. We saw a psychiatrist who specialised in autistic children. And as much as I did tick some of the boxes, hint, some of them, this psychiatrist insisted that I was not autistic because I cared about what other people thought about me. Back then, it was quite popular belief that autistic people didn't have empathy, which we now know is complete rubbish. And even every now and again, I still have to try and convince people that, well, we do have empathy, we just show it differently in ways you may not recognize. And unfortunately, as was the norm back then, my parents got an awful lot of shame for the fact that I was different. There was a very much strong stigma with autism. You know, you said, oh, my child's autistic. Nowadays, people might be more empathetic, be more understanding, know what you're talking about. But back then, they acted like you had bloody COVID. Like, seriously, you say autism, they start freaking stepping back from you. They think, oh, your child's going to catch autism. What was going on then? However, some things did happen. Namely, I was diagnosed not with autism, but with generalized anxiety disorder, hence why my anxiety is always ballistic, and auditory processing disorder, which basically means if someone is talking with a very strong accent, very fast, or in a way that I suppose sounds slightly, even the slightest bit nonsensical, my brain cannot process it properly, and I end up saying, what? Even today, when I'm at work, when people tell me something, not literally, like 5 times out of 10, I have to put my ear out of my mouth and go, I'm sorry, could you say that again? It's just normal for me. However, within school, there were some efforts made. Namely, some of the teachers created a safe corner within my classrooms to help me cope with my overloads, to give me a safe space that I could retreat to if it all got too much for me. And they printed off a personalised timetable for me to look at so I knew what was happening and when. No other student had that. They did that explicitly for me, which massively helped me. So, spent about 5-6 years in Australia. Come about 2013, I moved to the United Arab Emirates. First we moved to Dubai, then Abu Dhabi. I started school there not long after we moved. However, things didn't exactly change. It was still quite difficult. That being said, meltdowns, lack of educational support, same deal as it was in Australia. But the school I went to was a bit different. It was big, like massive. I suppose it had a certain prestige to it, whereas the school I went to in Australia was just a bog-standard public school. So rather drastic change of environment, which I suppose for an autistic person is never going to help, as some of you may well know from experience. To give you an example, in this big prestigious school, we had like shirts with little clip-on ties, which I mean, if any of you went to school recently or at all, you would probably know what I'm on about. One of the buttons fell off my shirt. Small deal, just like, oh, for God's sake, just fix it when you get home. However, I thought I was going to die. Because I thought my parents find out that I lost a button, they were going to swing me around the head, slam me onto the ground, and then start dancing over my dead corpse. I know, grim. But unfortunately, especially my anxiety disorder, that's what happens every time my anxiety kicks off. It's always the worst case scenario. And I struggled to understand why I kept jumping to that. Well, we'll get to that later. After 6 months in Dubai, my parents got a job offer in Abu Dhabi, the capital city, so we moved there. And again, new school. Yay. Well, really not. A lot of the schools there were like these big social melting pots, which means there were all sorts of people with different cultures and beliefs, but unfortunately that meant a lot of them didn't exactly have, well, no one really had an understanding of differences in how children's brains worked, which meant in basically every school I went to, I was always the odd one out, just because my brain worked differently, and consequently I acted in a way that made me stick out like a sore thumb. Some of the teachers at this new school, however, were pretty good. In fact, this school I went to in Abu Dhabi was the first one I'd ever been to that had a dedicated special educational needs department. They had a dedicated counsellor, they offered me support with my learning, weekly sessions. They could see I was struggling. They knew to put in an action plan to help me. And considering I spent, in goodness knows how many years before then, not having any support, that was a real big deal, because it showed things were getting better. However, of course, I had no diagnosis of autism. I still thought it was just my anxiety playing up. Later on, I began to realise that one of my biggest, I suppose, phobias was that of sudden loud noises. For example, fire alarms. And as much as they don't massively bother me today, they still slightly creep me out. School decided to show me behind the scenes of how the fire alarms worked, in the hopes that it would give me some sort of understanding of how it worked, and sort of give me the idea that this thing wasn't going to hurt me. It would just give me a little spook, but ultimately, it's there for your safety, which I get wholeheartedly, but my anxiety would beg to differ. A few years later, however, my parents were constantly trying to get me into a much better school, one that was vastly oversubscribed. So they got me into that school, and almost immediately, upon starting there, my academics, which were previously bad, completely turned around and suddenly got very good. Whilst I'd always been at under my targets, or working towards, as the schools would say, I was now working at them, or maybe even exceeding them, which sort of sets the scene for where I am today. The school was, even though it was in the Middle East, it was distinctively British, so to say. It had a very strong special educational needs department, and their policy towards bullying was, well, zero tolerance, which unfortunately I needed, because before then I'd been bullied for at least 2 years straight. And it wasn't until those 2 years were over that I actually realised, wait a minute, I've been bullied. Oh no. So that being said, if there was ever any problems in the school, if anyone ever gave anyone, myself included, any trouble, that got shut down real quick. And even more significantly, there were other disabled students there. It wasn't just me. I mean, sure, I didn't know I was disabled at the time, technically, but there were other students out there who had additional needs, who needed that support. And you could see them around the school. They weren't, like, hidden in some special classes. They were out and about with everyone else. Eventually, at the end of about year 7, I moved back to the UK and moved here to Wales. Joined a public school, well, a good public school, I should say, in year 8. As much as I still missed my old school, and I mean I still miss it today, this new school was pretty good. Unfortunately, there are very quickly some problems, i.e. bullying again, but that got stamped out real quick. But school was, for me, until I started 6th form, it was never really enjoyable, because there was so much emphasis on the social aspect of it. Everyone always mixing at lunchtime, all the big groups, all the cliques you get in the canteen, everyone going off doing their own thing. And I was just sitting in the middle thinking, what the hell am I doing? I had nowhere to go. And because of that, the only thing I could really do was just try, get my head down, focus on my work. And as much as I was good academically, socially, I wasn't. And that sucked the enjoyment out of it. Then again, school is, I suppose, not often enjoyable for autistic people, regardless. That being said, however, my parents very quickly started hammering the school, which, if there's anyone here who's a parent and your kids are having problems, don't worry about becoming unpopular with the school. If your child's having problems and you want to sort it out, keep banging on their door. Even if they start getting sick of this, keep going. Don't give them any rest until they give your child the support they need. Because otherwise, if you just give up, well then, that's kind of worse, because your child isn't going to get the support at all. At least you keep trying. Eventually, you throw enough stuff at the wall, and some of it is going to stick. Which is what my parents did in that case, and it worked. They had essentially a direct hotline with my head of year, which massively helped with stamping out any problems. Again, socially, things were a bit dead. Well, not good, really. I had no social groups. However, shortly after we moved back here, I heard of this wonderful thing called the RAF Air Cadets, which I'm now part of and still am today. And needless to say, that allowed me a much-needed break from my social despair. There were people there who were like me. To some extent, we were all well, not rejects, but we didn't fit in. There was something about us that just made us stand out from the usual, real, sporty lads in school who seemed to dominate every single social space. And it was quite small as well. It wasn't like school where the year groups are like 200 kids. This was just like, I don't know, on some nights, it'd only be just 12 of us, or even less. So it gave that sense of intimacy. We were all sort of this really close-knit, conjoined group. And we all just understood each other. No problems, no qualms. We just accepted each other as we were and just got along. That being said, however, come about age 12, only then did I start to realise, so for all these years, I've been having constant meltdowns, anxiety, bad luck at school, just generally speaking, it hasn't been a good time. Yet, it hasn't been the same for everyone else. Why the hell was that? Why was it just me? And no one else was like that, so I knew it could only be me. So, what? Does that mean something's wrong with me? I was pretty convinced there was something wrong with me. And because of that, I asked my parents, what the hell's wrong with me? And they said, well, we have our suspicions, but if you want to probe it, if you want to find out, then that's your choice. And ultimately, it was my choice. I said, I want answers. I want to know what's wrong with me. Well, I know now nothing's wrong with me, but at the time I was thinking, well, what's going on? Why is it that I've spent all these years in like 5 schools across 3 countries, always just never being able to enjoy myself, yet everyone else seems to go along just fine? Why is it just me? So coming about autumn, winter of 2019, we saw a psychologist in Cardiff. Bear in mind, I didn't actually get assessed because technically I'd been assessed when I was younger, but I didn't tick enough of the boxes for a diagnosis. So they just told them, try again when he's a few years older, which we did. We spoke to the psychologist about my experiences, my previous assessments. They took it up to a board, and they unanimously agreed I was autistic. This was during lockdown. I was just sitting on the sofa, doing some history stuff because I was absolutely bored out of my skull. My parents come along and tell me, oh, the psychologist has called and said, you're autistic. And for a second, I was like, what? Like, autism? What do you mean? What is that? It didn't quite hit me just how big of a deal that was. But now that I was diagnosed, I basically had no choice but to actually educate myself as to, well, what is this and how? What does it mean for me? But when I did get diagnosed, that was an answer. I got what I wanted. I knew now I could stop asking myself questions. Because now, instead of asking myself, well, why am I the way I am? I don't know. Now I can say, why am I the way I am? Because I'm autistic. I had an answer. Instead of always going back to this blank space in my mind that was just completely empty and I knew nothing about, there was something there, something I could recognize. But initially, I didn't actually know much about it, so I had to learn about it. Purely out of personal fascination, but also because, well, it was sort of necessary for me to cope with myself better. After we got diagnosed, that's when school actually got good, for once. Sorry. Sometimes even when you get diagnosed, if you've been in communication with the school, like beforehand, about like difficulties you may be having, even after you get diagnosed, you'll need to give them a little nudge. Simply just getting a diagnosis and waiting for things to get better, unfortunately, isn't always going to work. Instead, you'll need to show them the diagnosis. You'll need to tell them, okay, this is what's going on, and this is what we need to do. And you need to make sure they do it, because unfortunately, otherwise, if you don't tell them to do it, they won't. So, that being said, the school started doing things better. They had seating plans. They always sat me near a teacher where I had an easy open door to support and away from chatterboxes that distracted me. I was able to just zone in on myself, focus on my own things, and isolate myself from things that would otherwise be a bit distressing. Later on, to help me with my sound sensitivity, we brought these little things called called Flare Calm. They're like these little, I don't know what material, they look like these little plastic earbuds that you put in your ear, and it's meant to take the sharpness or sensitivity out of sounds. It doesn't completely muffle them, but it makes them a bit less unbearable. So, for example, say if I was in class and all of a sudden the fire alarm goes off, it's not going to give me so much of a shock that I potentially go into a meltdown, which did happen before, but now it doesn't, thanks to those. So if you do see them, I would personally recommend you get them. We had better access with the additional learning needs department. All the teachers knew about my difficulties. They knew what to do. They knew to look out for me. And they began to look out and to see other areas where I was struggling. For instance, some of them realized I was getting anxious with writing lots because, let's just say, when you're doing all essay subjects at A-level, your hands are going to bloody hurt. And if you're not good at writing fast, then it's going to be even harder. They noticed I was getting extremely anxious with writing, so they recommended they give me a laptop, which now makes it all the more easier. I made my home environment as my own little space, a space not for schoolwork but for relaxing. So anything I do in school stays in school. And if things get too stressful, I have my home as the space I have only for relaxing. I guess that's all routine. I know one place is for work, the other place is for relaxing. Nothing else. They never overlap. Otherwise, it defeats the whole point, and my anxiety gets bad. But nonetheless, with that better support, my academics greatly improved. So come my GCSEs, which I did last May, granted the grade boundaries were a bit inflated, but forget about that, I ended up with all A's and A stars, which a few years ago would have seemed completely okay. A few years ago, that would have sounded completely impossible. Like, if someone told my parents I'd come at my GCSEs, I'd absolutely ace them, they would have been like, the hell are you on about? Rubbish. Well, look at me. Like I said, completely aced them, and really, that's because I had all the support I needed. From a social perspective, namely the Air Cadets, when I first started, there were a few issues. Namely, I still struggle with socialising. Occasionally, I would suffer meltdowns. For example, at a big competition day I had a few years ago, we were just getting on the bus to leave, but then all of a sudden, one of the staff members told me to stay behind and clear up. I thought I was just going on the bus and going home, when really I wasn't. So I thought, wait, what if the bus leaves without me? One thing leads to another, and meltdown. Sometimes they even happen on my local units, which is kind of bad because I don't see them coming. My local unit is a bit of a safe space because everyone there understands me, they accept me, they look out for me. So when all of a sudden I start feeling anxious or overloaded on my local units, I start thinking, wait, this shouldn't happen, this is supposed to be my safe place. Why do I feel like I'm about to have a meltdown? It's wrong. However, once I got diagnosed, I took upon myself to educate people about autism to make sure they would be able to support me when I needed it. I began tapping into their own diversity inclusion network. I ran lessons with them and teaching them about the importance of understanding autism, supporting autistic people, but just also the importance of things like inclusion in general and what it can bring to organisations like the Air Cadets. I began to make positive changes to people's mindsets. Now I had this sudden urge to sort of go out there and educate people. Because, well, if you want people to accept something, first thing you need to do is educate them. Because if they don't understand it, if they don't know about it, how can you expect them to accept it? They have no knowledge of it. But if they have that knowledge, if they understand it, if they know how it works, what it's like, and ultimately how to help, then they will accept it. On social media, that sort of helped me with my getting away from my stress. I can just lock myself away in a dark room, just jump on Reddit or Discord, or usually one of those, mostly Discord now, and just connect with other people without all that stress of going out there with the outside world. Then, when I started my AS levels in September, I got a job at Greg's. I know, which I mean, in itself is a bit of a miracle because autistic people, unfortunately, have really low rates of employment. And I mean, I really hope that does get fixed, if you know what I mean. But everyone there, they got me. I mentioned my autism on my application, and eventually, come, I don't know, August, and I was sitting on the toilet, they rang up and offered me a job at my local shop. And then, about a week or so before I started, they called me up again and asked me about any commendations I needed. They knew I would need help, and they wanted to help me, which, I mean, for an employer, that's brilliant. Especially for me, considering that was the first proper job I had. I mean, if you ask me, I got extremely lucky that I went there, but nonetheless, Greg's have been brilliant with me. That being said, I still need to mask for a good few hours. I usually do shifts of 4 or 5 hours, so I'm having to sort of hide my traits, focus on people, or really channel my inner customer service. Sometimes the shop gets noisy, sometimes there's this one person who turns the music up slightly too loud, but I have to always go around back to the shop and turn it down. I know, it gets on my nerves. And when something starts to send my anxiety mental, I have to basically fight that flight instinct in myself. Because I could be serving someone, but my brain could be telling me, run, 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 run. I have to say, no, shut up, I'm busy. And I can't actually run until I'm done serving. Then I can go and sob behind the shop for a few minutes. So, what next? I'm in my second year of A-levels, which of course means I'm going to have to do my exams again in June and May. Ugh. I'm now looking at university. I've attended an open day already in July. There's another one coming in October, which I am going to do. We got in touch with student services. Turns out they and the university have this whole program dedicated specifically for autistic students. And if you're wondering which university I'm talking about, it's Cardiff University. Russell Group Uni, only one in Wales. Pretty good. That being said, if I do go to university, I'm not living in student accommodation. Nuh-uh. It'd be too much. I wouldn't have any support network. I'd be cut off from my safety net, especially if I'm living with other people. If I need to just go home as such and get some space to myself, well, how the hell am I supposed to do that when my neighbours are always getting absolutely off their face every damn night? I know it's impossible. So for my own good, I'm staying home if I go to university. Next year, hopefully, though, my school is doing a trip to Berlin. That would be the first time I've ever gone to another country by myself, which would, I mean, I know it sounds drastic considering I've never done that. All the times I have been to other countries, it's always been with my family. If I do that, I'll be on my own, which means when I'm in this completely new environment that I've never been to and I have absolutely no idea where the hell I'm even going, I'll need to take charge of myself. With every situation I walk into, I'll need to assess what's going on. Is there anything here that can trigger me? What escape routes do I have? Where can I go if I need help? And I need to do that with every situation I go into, whether it's at home or abroad. But sometimes there will be situations where I have to duck out immediately. For example, a relative's birthday I recently went to. The minute I walked in, I saw a little kid running around with those little rubber balloons, which bloody terrify me. And as soon as I saw that, I just pushed my whole family out the door and said, nope, I'm not having this, I'm out. And I was out of there in a good few minutes. But more importantly, I know when I need to leave. I can recognize my telltale signs of a meltdown. To put it this way, say you feel nauseous. You feel like you want to just flop on the floor. What if you just wanted to flop on the floor, but you can't? Something is keeping you glued on your feet. As if you feel like, but instead of just going, bleh, you feel like you're stuck, waving on the spot, with nowhere to go. That's what it feels like if I'm about to have a meltdown. And for me, that's how I know this is getting too bad, I need to get out of it. And even then, when my anxiety gets bad, my sensory difficulties get worse with it. I suppose, I've overrun a little bit, so I should wrap this up, like I usually do. But, especially for any autistic people out here, there will always be times, well, not always, but at some points in your life, there will be times when you walk into a situation and you may immediately realise it's too much. Like, there's no way you can cope with it. You just have to pull yourself away from it altogether. And, I mean, I know that firsthand. And then again, I'm not even an adult yet. I'm 17. So, I mean, I've got less than a year until I become an adult. And once I do become an adult, life is going to get a hell of a lot more complicated. And because of that, I'll be on my own. I won't always have my safety net, my family, my friends. They will always be with me. I need to be able to take control of my own ship at some point in my life. Granted, my family and my parents and my brother have always been there to help me steering it, but sooner or later, I need to take full charge of it, because if I don't, well then, what am I going to do then? It's like a personal risk assessment. You give yourself your own criteria, tailored to your own needs. If you know what things may trigger your anxiety or whatever, you know what to look for. You know where to find escape routes. For example, with this place, they have the quiet rooms. So if something made me feel overwhelmed, I know I have an escape route. There is somewhere I can go to make myself feel safe. And equally, if there are no escape routes and there's triggers absolutely everywhere, well then, sometimes you may need to make the decision, is it better for me to leave? And as much as it can be a bit of a pain, especially if it's a place you want to be, unfortunately, I suppose that's just life. Sometimes things don't always go your way, but especially if you're autistic, you need to put yourself first. If you get overwhelmed, then you get overwhelmed. You need to step back. I mean, there's still a lot that I don't know about my life as an autistic person, because that being said, I'm still growing up. But that's how it's been for me so far, and very likely things will change. Question is, will I deal with it? Only time will tell. Thank you.